Hey everybody, this is Koba speaking again, and today we're going to I'm going to do a little request. One of my students actually asked me to do a full creation process of one of the models that we have done in class, and the one that I'm actually referring to is this little one. I got this concept art off of Pinterest the other day, and I gave them the choice of essentially making different types of models from reference guides that I provided, and then they can choose essentially how much detail they want to put into it. And so I decided to make a specific tutorial on the start to finish process of this particular one, as it has quite a few elements to it. It has different material types, a wood, plastic, probably there's some metal frames, there's some iron, there's some bamboo material, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is actually show you guys how we bring this into Maya as an image plane, just kind of put it off to the side, and then from there we actually start building the basic block out of this model. So first things first, I'm going to go into my view, and I'm going to go all the way down to image plane and then bring the image plane in. From there I will go to my reference folder, which I have in my Google Drive, and reference folder, and there we go. Right, as it brings it in, essentially it covers the whole screen, and we need to obviously change the dimensions of this so it's much smaller. So with the current image plane being selected, as you can see here, I'm going to go to the attribute editor. Attribute editor hotkey is Control A, and that allows you to cycle between the channel box and the attribute editor. And I'm going to go down to where it says size, and I'm going to hold down Control while I click inside of these text, or rather number windows, and that's going to allow me to interactively increase or decrease the scale and size of it. Right underneath that there's the offset along the X and the Y axes, so depending on where you want to move it to, you can use that to your advantage. So I'm going to make this a bit smaller, kind of line it up there roundabout, and maybe just a bit up, something along there. That's good, that's perfect. Right, so now that I have the image plane, essentially my process for this is to try and block it out with the most simplest blocked out version or geometry that I can possibly make. And usually my method for this is to essentially start with you know, the bigger elements, the bigger stuff that will actually create the silhouette for us. And so I'm going to stick to essentially cubes, cylinders, maybe some planes, and that's going to get us pretty much 90% there, and then after that we will decide how we want to add the details and so on and so forth. Great. So I'm going to start with one of the poly primitive cubes, and if you click on it, it's going to give you an interactive creation dialog. It pops up and asks you how big do you want to create the shape, so you can essentially click and drag, and then right after that it's going to ask you the height of it. Now, if you don't like this method of having it interactively drawing it out directly onto the canvas, and you would like to have it always be exactly 1 by 1 by 1 units, depending on the grid size that you have set, then we can go ahead to the create menu here at the top, and then just go to Polygon Primitives, and you can turn off this interactive creation. I find that having this option on is quite, well, as it says, interactive, and it really allows us to immediately get to the basic shape, and then after that we can change the dimensions, the subdivisions, and so on. So for now I'm going to leave that on, and I'm going to start off with the basic floor shape. Now if we look at the reference, I'm going to bring it up as a separate image and actually zoom in on it, and you can see that it looks like we've got separate planks running in our horizontal axes, and then we've got some cloth or stuff lying on top of it. So essentially that's what I'm going to block out first, and then we're going to go to these over here, and most likely these elements over here. Right, so first things first, I have to decide my unit scale, my dimensions, and so on. I like to work with my grid being pretty well set up into a metric system. So I like to set my length and width of my grid field, the borders of my grid field, to be about 10 meters in units, and my unit system in my is set to centimeters. So essentially 1,000 refers to 10 meters, and we're going to divide each of these up into 100 centimeters. So that's going to give us the darker lines over here, and then each subdivision is equal to 10 centimeters in width. So that's essentially how I like to work. Right. With that said, I'm going to close this, and we're going to get started. I'm going to hold down X to grid snap, and this is going to allow me to click directly on a grid unit, and I can draw out the shape with the exact shape to the grid pattern that I want. And that keeps things nice and clean for me as the initial starting point. And then as soon as you let go, obviously it's going to ask you to create the heights, and then from there you can place it down. So right after that, we can go ahead and try and count these. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 7. Let's say 7. I'm going to go ahead and hold down Control, pressing D. I can make a duplicate copy, and as you can see, it started off as a duplicate right on top of the original one, and it's just a matter of using your move tool by pressing W, and you can move it off. Right after I've moved my first one, I'm going to hold down Shift and pressing D. So this is essentially duplicate with transform. That copies it from the first, and then the distance that the first and the second moved, it's actually going to copy that information to the third, the fourth, and so on. And I'm going to repeat that until I have exactly the amount of copies that I need. Great stuff. I think maybe I should do 8. That gives us a little bit more of a vertical kind of axis, or shall I rather say something more like a rectangle, and that's going to give us a little bit more space to work with. Next thing is I'm going to probably get these blocked out. I'm going to essentially start again with a cube, click on the grid, hold down X rather, click on the grid and drag out, and that's going to give us the base. It's going to be about that much. I'm going to move it down to be about there, and I'm going to make that separate as from the base. So I'm going to make a copy of this, Control D. I'm going to move it straight up, and I'm going to snap my pivot to the base at the bottom. So by doing so, you have to hold down D. I'm going to click on this line, and that's going to allow me to move the pivot. But essentially what I want to do is hold down D for pivot mode, and then I want to align this perfectly to the bottom of that vertex at the lowest point of this cube. So essentially it's two hotkeys hold down, so D and V for vertex snap. You can see that magnet turning on for vertex snap. So now if you click and drag, it's essentially going to find the closest vertex to wherever your mouse cursor is. So I'm going to move my mouse right up to that vertex, and that's the space that it's going to sample. As soon as you let go, it leaves the pivot and the manipulator in that space, and that means I can now just use the vertex snap instead of pivot manipulation as well. And I'm going to drag that down and then align it to that bottom or the top part of this bottom cube. I'm going to scale this down a bit, and that's going to give us the exact even spacing from all directions. Good stuff. I do feel like we might have to make it just a bit thinner. It seems a bit thinner than the original base, something like that. And now what I'm going to do is essentially extrude this shape up and round, and we have to decide whether we want to start off creating a curve so that the face that I'm going to extrude from follows that path, or would I rather want to use the built-in generate curve function. I'm going to show you the one function. If you right click on the model and you go to face mode and you select the face, and we do an extrude using this button over here, it's essentially just giving you the manipulator for us to extrude from. Now what I can do is I can go in here into the options. If you double click on the icon, That's going to bring us the tool settings for that particular tool, and then you can see down here curve settings. We can either have a selected curve or we can generate a curve on the fly. The default curve that gets generated essentially has only a small amount of subdivisions, so we have to try and play with it to get the best shape out of it initially. So I'm going to get the height using the thickness, and around about there should be good. And what I'm going to do now is go to wireframe by pressing 4 on the keyboard. And what I want to do now is I want to grab this bottom curve. Wait, actually I'm going to undo. It seems like I'm going to reset this thickness down to 0, purely for the reason that the curve is actually driving the height and the shape of it. But I definitely need to add some division, so I'm going to add, let's say, about 5 or 6, and then I'm going to grab the curve and go to its component mode. So there's object mode, there's component mode. You can cycle between those, or you can hit F8, and then you can grab this point over here at the top, and as I pull this up, you essentially see that I'm changing the dimension and the shape of it. So that's a function that's quite useful. I'm going to bring this up a bit more, change the curvature a bit more, and bring this back, something along that line. Now it's not perfect. You can see that it kind of changes dimension and shape a bit. Like I said, you only have a limited amount of points to play with, so the initial setup does give me an alright result, but I think I can do a much better result if I had to do this by hand. It just takes a bit longer. So I'm going to close the options, and I'm going to go ahead, go back to object mode, select my object, and I'm going to clear the history. So by doing so, you're essentially breaking the connection between the curve and the extruded object, and that allows me to then delete the curve, and I don't have any distortion or break between the object and the history between the curve. So that means now I can go and grab some of these points, and I can go and adjust them by hand, you know, just get the overall shape and details aligned. I'm going to spend some time trying to refine this. I'm just essentially going to scale tool, and I'm flattening these angles. By doing so, I'm keeping everything nice and clean and straight. So that one goes down, this one goes across, and I'm also going to switch to face shaded view. I'm going to select one of these edges. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift. Now what that allows me to do is essentially slide the surface, slide this edge along the surface of the object. So by doing so, I'm actually changing the angle without changing the depth of the model. Otherwise I would have been doing this and then that and then this, but by doing so I'm actually maintaining the volume, so that's pretty useful if you guys ever want to get into that kind of stuff. So I'm going to snap align these, bring these back a bit more. Okay, I feel this one is a bit too far out. This one I'm going to slide up and out a bit, slide up. Okay, I think that's okay. I'm not going to be too specific about these details. It's still in its block out phase, and so we will repeat the same details on the other side, but I'm going to use a duplicate function and a mirror to the other side. So I'm not too concerned about some of these details on the other side. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start off creating this cube and essentially repeat the same process. So I'm going to quickly run through this, starting with a basic primitive, click and drag. It's about that long. The height will be much thinner, so I'm going to drag it out to be about there, and we'll repeat the same process. About 4, so duplicate once, moving off 1, 2. I'm going to grab all of them and then bring them more to the center, something like that. Right, they're slightly closer stacked to each other, so the spacing in between is too much. So with all 4 of them selected, I'm going to switch to Scale Tool by pressing R, and I'm going to use the Scale Tool to just pull them all a bit further out, and that gives me a tighter spacing in between. It definitely feels a bit too thin, so I'm going to scale it up as well, and I think I'm happy with that. Right, so the next thing that I want to do is essentially rotate this down. Now if I rotate it down by using my E hotkey on the keyboard, I'm going to rotate it down, no problem, but the pivot is in the center. I essentially want to rotate all of them down from this angle. So I can do that same pivot technique holding down D, and I'm going to click and drag this back. Now if I want to be more specific, I can click, hold down D and V for vertex snap, and click my axis and drag it all the way back, and that's going to give me that snapping angle, and that's going to allow me to rotate this down. I'm going to get it to be about there somewhere. I think I'm happy with that. And now I'm going to jump to the next part, which is essentially this bamboo section. So based on the reference, if we have a look here, it looks like there's a very strong beam support on either ends. We've got 2 cross beams, and then we've got some anchors down here, and it also looks like there's quite a big log down underneath the support for the deck. Right, so what I'm going to do next is essentially start off with a cylinder. Now the initial creation for the cylinder is way too much subdivisions around the axes of the cylinder. So what I want to do is I want to set the default creation process for the cylinder to be much less. Especially when you're creating low poly assets for games, you want to keep things on the low end. So I'm going to double click on my poly cylinder, and I'm going to reduce the axes from the I think the default is 20. Yes, reset tool, set to 20. I'm going to bring this back down to 8. And 8 or 6 is actually a pretty good number to start off with, as it allows us to keep the profile nice and round, especially from a distance. And but it definitely reduces the poly count quite considerably. So that's definitely something that I want to do. So the next thing that I want to do is essentially start placing these things within the position. So I'm going to do that, grab these handles, move it into position. I'm going to bring this down, and maybe what I should do is also create a ground plane for me, so I can actually get the height and dimension of how far I want to move things. So that's going to be my base, so that gives me a good indication of how far I want to move this down. Right, good. I'm going to grab the vertex mode, select the top row, and just pull that up, and that's going to be about there, it seems. But I definitely feel like the radius of the cylinder is too wide, so that I need to adjust. Now there's 2 ways of adjusting it. We can use the scale tool, or we can make use of the poly cylinder. If you change the radius here, you can actually change the dimensions. Just keep in mind, whenever you change your object component mode and then go back to the inputs in your channel box and you're trying to change these values, the model will not react the way you expect. Now I haven't added any details like subdivisions along the shape when I did the component editing, so it means that my radius tool should still be working. But if I had to add some additional subdivision axes, you can see that my model is now freaking out. It's purely because I've essentially changed the dimensions of my initial shape of the model, and that causes it to break. Right, so getting it into position. Should be good with that. I am going to add a few extra subdivisions, but this time not with my poly cylinder inputs. I'm going to make use of my multi-cut. Now, like I've mentioned in all my videos, I love using the modeling toolkit. So you can turn on your modeling toolkit here, and then click on the power button. Now, if your power button does not work, or if this icon does not get activated and it gives you a little error at the bottom of your screen, you have to go and turn on the plugin inside of your plugin manager. You can find that under Window Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and bring it into this view. And you can see if we scroll down, you'll see there's a modeling toolkit. Make sure that both of these are checked, and once you've turned it on, you want to go to File and say save your preferences. That way it will automatically pop up the next time when Maya is loaded. So I want to turn this button on. I'm going to use the multi-cut, and now I can specifically choose where I want to add the details. If you hold down Control, it's giving you a little insert edge loop function, and I can split this exactly where I want to give it definition. And then after that, I'm going to give it some simple adjustments, not too complex. Grab some of these points, give it some bending. No pole or piece of wood, it's going to be perfect all the time, so you want to give it some angle adjustment, maybe a bit of rotation, even a bit of scale, just to give it some randomness. Right, I have that done. I'm also going to create the same type of thing for these two. I'm going to start off with my polycylinder, draw it out, and I'm going to go to my 4-pane view. I'm going to go to wireframe for all of them. So wireframe, 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 and grab the object. I want to bring it back a bit. It's going to be about here. And then from the top view, I can see that I definitely need to bring it in, and I'm going to start rotating this guy towards the axis of my roof, which is about something like that. I'm going to get it into, let's say, snap it here on the grid, and I'm going to increase its height. So by default, the height goes only up to 100, even if you're trying to change the value by clicking on the name and middle mouse dragging. The maximum value is always set to 100 by default, but you can override it by typing a much higher number, like let's say 500, and you can actually now see that I've updated it accordingly. Now that's way too much. I'm going to reduce that to something like 300 and maybe 350. Yeah, I think that looks good. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to place it about there, and I'm going to repeat the same process for the next one. Now I want to add additional subdivisions ahead of time, so I might as well go here to the height axis and give it something like 5, or yeah, 5 should be good. And then just duplicate it holding down Control and D, and that gives me a second copy. Right, so now we're slowly progressing towards the actual model and the building blocks. I'm going to start creating these planks. We've already made them, so I might as well just grab some of these and duplicate them, and then just rotate them along the axes. You can always use your front view to align that better. And I'm going to bring them down. And now the thing is, now that I've rotated it, I want to have it follow along that same axis as my initial angle of my poles. So what I'm going to do is actually switch my move manipulator to be at the same angle as my object angle. And you can do that through the move tool. So if I double click on the move tool, you can see there's different move spaces or axes. So essentially it's currently set to world by default, and if I switch to object mode, it actually takes the orientation of the object and kind of angle my manipulator according to that axis, which makes it a lot easier for me to get things placed in a very specific position along that axis. As always, I like to reset it back, A nice hotkey to access the same window through a marking menu is if you hold down W, which is your tool for move tool. If you hold it down and you left click, essentially you've got these options right here to your disposal, and you can choose whichever mode you want to go into. By the way, I'm holding down left click, not just clicking it. So I'm holding down W and holding down left click, and that gives me my marking menu pop up. Good stuff. So after that, I am going to maybe scale some of these bigger and smaller just to give it some randomness. None of these planks will be exactly the same width all the time. So we are allowed to play with this. Okay, and then this one. And then also I'm going to move these up and down. Maybe change some of their dimensions, grab these points, same thing. I'm going to switch to, instead of object mode now, oh yes, I can do that, so I might as well do that. Pull it up a bit, grab some of these, essentially do exactly the same thing. So I love chopping and jumping between my different marking menus. So if you guys ever feel like you want to improve your workflow, make sure you learn how to use your marking menus. They are super efficient and they will make your life so much easier and effective. Right, so I've got that basic blocked out there. I also want to duplicate another one. Maybe I'll duplicate this one. No, do not want to save yet. Control D. And I'm going to rotate this 40, essentially 90 degrees from that angle, and you can do so, oopsie, didn't want to do that, by either typing the number in here, or you can go to your rotational tool and then hold down J and then use one of your snapping angles, and that's going to allow you to align it to a specific degree. So that's very, very useful and convenient. Lighten this a bit. Move it up a bit, grab these guys, don't want the poles, move them up, and I'm going to duplicate this guy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, slowly progressing, slowly getting there. I'm going to duplicate this guy, move it off to the other side to be about there, and this one seems to be much taller, so we need to have it support it. I'm going to grab these axes, move it up like that. Right, and I think I might be doing the same thing to this one as well. I'm going to move it up, move this up. And I am going to improvise a bit just because I want to give it my own flair to it, but for the most part I'm going to try and stick to the building blocks of this house. So at the bottom I can see where we still need to create that huge log, and I'm going to do that using my essential interactive creation. I'm going to get it to be the width that I want. I'm going to make the base be the width that I need it to be, and I'm going to move that into position. Actually, I am going to adjust it as well. I need to change the height of it, something more like that. Right, that looks much better. At the moment, we still need to create some rock supports. We also need to either bring the floor plane up. It's definitely too low down, but I mean, those are simple things that we can adjust after the fact. I think what I'm going to do is start creating some strings, maybe start creating these little rocks and these little buckets and so on. Let's actually start with this log chair. That's quite simple. In fact, if we start off with cylinder, again starting off with that 8-sided section, if you look at the axes of the cylinder, it is essentially divided into the cross sections and then 245 degrees. That means I can easily go ahead and delete one half from the top view, and that's going to leave me with a log that's divided up through the center. Essentially all I need to do now is fill the gap in between, and you can do that two ways. We can either fill it and use the multi-cut to split through the center to keep that nicely quadded, or we can use the append to polygon tool, that's another tool, or we can use bridge. Now I'm going to start off with bridge just because that's one of the more simpler ones. So essentially you have two edges selected in edge mode, and then what you want to do is you want to click on the bridge tool in your modeling toolkit, and that's going to connect one side, and you do exactly the same thing to the other side. If we were to use the fill hole, that's also quite easy. Essentially you have one component selected under your I think it is under the mesh tool, menu, sorry, fill hole. That's going to fill it, and then we can use the multi-cut to cut through. That's another way of approaching it. And then furthermore, there's one last, which is making use of the append to polygon tool. This is the older classical way of how Maya used to work. Essentially you pick the face and it gives you these purple, orange, purple, pink, I guess, lines, and then you can choose where you want to bridge from and to. And you can always kind of create your own custom shape if you want to. But if you click directly on the edge, it's actually going to find the borders for you and fill that. So there's three ways of approaching it. Right, so I'm rotating that 45 or 90 degrees rather, and we just need to create those stilts and supports down there at the bottom. Now I'm going to use a cube to start off with that. I'm going to draw out the basic shape, the width of it, pull it up. And I'm going to get that wedged in exactly where I want it to be. First of all, let's change the top face to be squished in a bit more. So I'm going to use the scale tool, make sure I use my world axes, and I'm having problems with my mouse for some reason, but it doesn't matter. Right. So I'm going to try and position that right in the center of it. So with this one selected, that one secondly selected, I'm going to go to Align tool, and that brings up this tool. That's quite interesting. It's got these little dots all over the place. Essentially what I want to do is align to the center box. That's going to get this to be perfectly aligned to that center axis along the bounding box. And then from there, I still feel like I need to adjust the width of it. So I'm going to grab that and then scale that in, right, and then the bottom is too far down, so I'm going to grab the face at the bottom and just use my move tool going up, and there we go. There's our block wedge. And I'm going to copy that to the other side. Hold down Control, press D, move it off to the other side. I'm not going to be too perfect about the space distance between this side and that side. I'm going to first block out everything that I want, and then I'll be very specific later on. With that being selected, I'm going to show you guys how you can group stuff. All three of these elements being selected, I'm going to go to Edit, and then I'm going to say Group. You can see the hotkey for that is Control G. Very useful. And the cool thing about the grouping is it makes, if you open up your outliner over here, you'll see that there's a little new group that's been made, and all three of these elements are now stored inside of it. So essentially that gives me a node that controls all three shapes at the same time. Another thing to note about it is it's a great way of making quick adjustments to the scale of everything as a whole. That's why I like to group stuff. So with that being selected, I'm going to go to Modify and then Center the Pivot. That places the group's pivot to the center of the object in its place in world, whereas the default position is usually in the center of your grid. So that being said, I'm going to move this guy into position. And obviously you can rename it by double clicking and so on. the moment I am going to stick to just getting the basic stuff done first. I'll rename everything afterwards. Right, now that's done, I'm going to jump to the next part. Actually, that's already a group duplicate of that one, so I might as well select one of these. If I press up on the keyboard, it's going to actually select the whole set for me, or the group node, and if I hit Ctrl D, it creates another group right on top of it, and I can make a whole copy of the chair and reposition it where I want it to be. So that's quite convenient. Okay, I'm going to place this guy about here somewhere. Right, now for the bucket. The bucket is quite interesting. It's got multiple sides to it. I'm going to start off with a basic block out first. That's going to be my cylinder, my regular cylinder, and I'm going to do a set of extrudes to kind of create the inside shape, and then afterwards I will use maybe something like a deformer, like a lattice deformer, to actually scale the shape up a bit to get that wedged effect. So first things first, I'm going to go to the face mode. I'm going to hold down tab. Now if I hold down tab, it's essentially giving me a different kind of mouse cursor, a little dot. So if I click and drag, that's going to allow me to create an array of selection. It's almost like paint selection, but it's built into the modeling toolkit, which is pretty awesome. If I click on the extrude button over here, that's going to put me in extrude mode, and that's going to allow me to then left click and drag and pull straight up along the depth or the local Z axis. So what I want to do instead is I want to first change the offset inward. So I'm clicking on the offset, pulling that in, letting go, and then I'm going to do another extrude, and that's going to give me enough detail to actually pull down. So I'm going to click on extrude once, that takes me out of the tool, and I'm going to click on it one more time, and that's going to put me back into the extrude tool. So once it's dented in or blue like this, it means that the tool is currently active. So essentially by clicking once on it, it goes into the tool, clicking twice, it takes you out, and then you have to press it again if you want to go back into the tool. Now, cool thing about the modeling toolkit is it actually takes the current information that you've piped into it and just applies it to the next section of extrude. But I don't want to do that. I want to start off with the default settings. So I'm going to click on reset, and I want to use the local Z to just pull not out but rather in. So I'm moving my mouse the opposite direction. I'm going to take it about there. It should be good. I can always go to wireframe to see the depth of it. Yeah, that should be good. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go back to 5 shaded view and go back to object mode, and that gives me the bucket that will finally be shaped to look more like the reference. It does have rings that runs around it, so that is something that we can potentially do now, or we can decide to do that after the fact. But in fact, you know what, let's do it now. So I'm going to go to the multi-cut tool, or rather let's jump to another tool, something like the connect tool. Is great for if you want to do multiple splits that's equally apart, distance apart. So if you select one of the edges that you want to split, you can click on the connect tool, and it's going to find its own path around the model, and then all you have to do is change the number of sections. So currently it's set to sections. You can see it's dented. And then I'm going to left click and drag, rather middle mouse click and drag. That's going to give us the amount of segments that I want to add to it. I'm going to do 2. I don't want to go too high. And then I'm going to use the pinch to kind of pinch them slightly further apart. And what I'm going to do with this is essentially create that metal ring that wraps around the object. Or maybe we should, yeah, let's do that. And then once I'm done with that, I'm just going to press enter, and that's also going to take you out of the tool. Once I've done that, I'm going to then bevel both of these, and that's going to give me the depth, how wide I want the metal rings to be. Something along that should be good. And then after that, I need to essentially extrude these rings. So you can do that by selecting the loop selection with one face selected. I'm going to double click on the next. That's going to give me the ring that wraps around. Essentially, I'm doing the same thing to the bottom. With that being selected, I'm going to jump back into my extrude tool, and I can use the reset settings, and I'm going to just pull in a bit, sorry, rather out, not in, and that's going to give me my actual metal rings or supports. Going back to object mode, I now want to use a tool that is inside of my deformation tab. This one is great for if you want to do overall adjustments to the height, shape, and profile. It's the first one in the list. If you click on it, it essentially creates a bounding box that wraps around the model. So whatever you do to the bounding box, the model inside will get affected by it. So I'm going to change that using I'm essentially changing its amount of detail that I have currently on it. And you can do that using the attribute editor or the channel box. I'm going to go to the FFD, and I'm going to change its initial rings. So I'm going to start off with something like 3, 3, and 3. That gives me just enough detail so that I can actually widen the top section and keep the bottom nice and flat. So I'm going to right click on the bounding box. I'm going to go to lattice points, click and drag over these, and I'm going to scale it up. So by doing so, I'm actually widening the base, and I can also pinch this in or out if I want to give it more of a cartoony bulge effect. So yeah, there's many different effects that we can do to it to give it some interesting looking details. So I'm going to do something like that. That's pretty interesting. And once I'm done with the outside profile, I'm going to go to object mode and select it. So what I essentially want to do is, with the current shape that I have, I want to bake it into the model, because currently the lattice is deforming the object. If I take the lattice and I move that around, the object follows along. If I grab the object and I move it outside of the lattice, you'll actually see it changes back to the original shape. So we want to bake that new shape right on top of the model so I can get rid of the lattice, and then the shape maintains its volume. You can do so by just clearing your history. You can do so by edit, delete by type, history, and that's going to keep the model and the lattice will disappear. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting, quick way of making a little bucket. Right, so there we go. It looks like another type of canister or something lying right next to it. Essentially that repeats the same process. I'm going to go and see if there's anything else in here that's very specific that I can introduce some new tools to you guys. I don't think there's anything specific right at this point. Maybe some extrusion along your custom curve. I can show you guys how to do that. Yeah, let me do that, and then we can jump to the next part where I've essentially blocked out all the shapes, and then I'll focus on more specific details like these details over here. Right, let's actually get into that, quickly extruding along the curve. I'm going to start off with the create menu, and here at the top you've got two different type of curves. They work slightly different, but they're essentially get to the same result. I love using the CV curve tool, and I also like to set the default degrees to cubic. That keeps it nice and round. Or you can also set it to linear, and that's going to allow you to create a single point linear profile curve. It's all up to you at the end of the day how you want to create it. So I'm going to close this window, and I'm going to go to my side view over here, and essentially what I want to do is I want to start off drawing a very basic profile curve to represent the string that wraps around these two support beams. So from here to there. So what I need to do is essentially just create the curve in one of the profiles, and then I will extrude along that shape, and that's going to give me my rope. So I need to choose what's the best view, whether it's the front view, the side view, or the top view. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's just whatever gets you to that point. So if I create the curve like this, for instance, and I hit enter, that's going to initiate the creation process for me. I can then use this curve to then extrude a face along it. I can use it to do quite a few things. And the nice thing about it, it's live connected. So if I manipulate any of these points after the fact, the shape will get updated on the fly as well. So I'm going to do that using a simple multi-curve creation process. I'm not just going to stick to one single curve. It just keeps things easier for me to create and also explain for you guys. So I'm going to essentially create the simple curve wrapping around these two poles. I'm going to create one that goes down over here. I'm going to create this taut string that wraps around to this part and then across. And then afterwards I will do the rings that wraps around the objects as separate curves. So let's get started. I'm going to jump to here, and I'm going to go to my create curve, go to CV curve. I'm going to start off at the highest point, and I'm essentially just spanning this across to get the curve shape going. Going to hit enter. If I feel like I need to adjust these points after the fact, I am allowed to do that by going to component mode, and I can play with the shape until I am happy with it. Okay, moving these things up a bit, grabbing these points, adjusting until I'm happy. Okay, let's say I'm happy with that. I'm going to go to my perspective, and I can see that the curve was created right in the center of my axes on my grid. So that's normal for any curve creation when you do it in one of your side views, or my front view or top view. And all you have to do is just move it back into 3D space where it should be afterwards. So there we go, that's my first curve. I'm going to jump back in, and I'm going to create another curve that runs around. So I'm going to start off there. Oopsie. Let's go back to create curve. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The point count really doesn't matter. It's more about getting the shape to work for you. So with that shape being made, I'm going to go ahead and just move it into position. Right. It looks like it's on the wrong side. I can always grab the curve and then center the pivot, modify center pivot, and I'm going to rotate that exactly 180 degrees. Move it to the other side, move it back, and that should be okay for now. Right. So the next curve I will be making going between this pole, and then one from there to there, and one from there going across. So I think the top view might be best suited for this job. So I'm going to go create CV curve. I'm going to start off, let's have a look. I'm going to start off going from here to there, across to the other side, and so top view will probably be the best. It's quite hard for me to see exactly what's going on, but it seems like it's between this one and this one. You can always turn on your wireframe on shaded. That's going to give you a better indication of where your geometry actually starts and stops, and that's exactly what I want. So I want to go from here. I want to extend this across to be about there, and then I'm going to go across to be halfway, and I'm going to move it into position. I'm only doing halfway because when I mirror copy this to the other side, essentially it repeats the same shape anyways. and this one seems to be going upwards and across, so I can always go to component mode and tweak these points to get them more or less in the shape that I want. I'll also show you guys how we can rebuild the curve to add more points so that they're all evenly spaced out, but I'll do that afterwards. I'm going to press Y, which is the hotkey for last used tool. As soon as I do that, or is it rather G? Yes, G. G is the hotkey that I want to use. I'm going to go from between this pole and this pole, so I guess we're looking at this view. I'm going to go from there and go across all the way to there, and I'm going to move it into position. Get it close. It's a bit too loose, so it feels like I need to pinch it in a bit. So I'm going to do modify center pivots. I'm going to use a scale tool to actually pull this slightly more straighter. Okay, great. I'm happy with that. So now for the rope, we have the choice of either starting with a cylinder, or we can actually start with a cube and then round out the corners to make it feel like more like a rope. We can also do it like with the single string, being a flat plane. There's multiple ways of approaching it, but if you like to have thick volume to your mesh, a cylinder is the best to do that. But I feel like 8 subdivision axes might be too much. We could also reduce this to about 4 or 5 sides. So let's do 4, and actually let's do 5. And that's going to give me something that looks like this. And that's going to give me just about enough divisions to create the round profile shape that I want to use. And I'm going to prefer that over my 8 sides, especially because of it being such a small element. So to do that, I'm first going to align the basic object to one of the points on the curve, and then I will use the face selection and then extrude along that curve. That's essentially what I'm going to do. So that's quite easy. All I have to do is curve snap that to one of these objects, and it's very, very important to keep in mind which side you actually started with the curve when you initially created it. If you started on this side, then you need to snap it to this side. If you start on that side, then you need to snap it to that side. The reason for it being so important is if you extrude along the point, if let's say you start extruding the shape from the end point to the start, the object is going to loop back to itself. It will make more sense once we actually demo this out. So when I started off, I started on this side for this curve. I'm going to have both of these two objects selected, and I just want to isolate it because our scene is getting quite cluttered at the moment. So I'm going to click on this little green icon here at the top that says isolate selected. That makes it a lot easier for me to navigate my scene. So with that being selected, I'm going to move my pivot of my object to the top base right over there. So I'm going to hold down D and V, left click and drag that to that center point, and then I'm going to take that point and then hold down C, and you can see that actually switching on and off over here at the top. If you're holding down, it turns on. If you let go, it turns off. So I'm going to hold it down, middle mouse click and drag, get it into position, and then from there I can literally just rotate it. Now most people get this a bit wrong. They struggle to actually snap that to the curve. The reason for that being is that when you switch to curve mode, holding it down, people like to click and drag from the center of their manipulator, and that is why it never snaps. Essentially the process is holding down C, then middle mouse, click and drag directly on the curve. If you don't do that, it's not going to sample the space that you initially started or that you want to snap it to, and it's the curve that you want to snap to and not the manipulator that you want to snap it to. So I'm going to rotate that to get it about the same axis that I want. And I'm also going to shrink it down quite a bit to get it much thinner. With that being in place, I'm going to now essentially extrude the selected faces on my object by going into face mode with the selected curve. Now the curve is usually the last part that you have selected, and it needs to be in object mode. If your curve is not in object mode and your object is not in face mode, then you won't be able to essentially extrude this. So right after that, I am going to hold down Shift. Another way of approaching extrude is Shift, right click, that's the marking menu way. I'm going to go straight down to extrude faces. Now, if you remember last time when we did the extrude, we actually turned on the generate function. I'm going to reset these settings so it's based on the selected curve, not generated curve. I'm going to hit apply, and that's going to give me this interesting looking extrude. It seems like my initial starting point ended up being on that side and not on this side, and that's typically the situation that I was referring to. So if I change the amount of divisions to 2, 3, 4 and more, you'll actually see it jumps to the end point but then loops back to itself, and then the end result is quite strange. So that means I need to either go and place the object on the other side, or we can reverse the curve direction. So I need to essentially go back all the way to the start, grab the curve, the start meaning before I essentially did the extrude. I'm going to have the curve selected. I'm going to go to surfaces, and then under the edit curve menu, I'm going to turn on the curve reverse function. So reverse curve. Once you click on that, essentially it changes the start and end point, and that's about it. And now essentially we will have a successful extrude. So again, I'm going to select these guys, middle mouse, clicking, or rather shall I say holding down Shift and left mouse, not middle mouse, and then doing the extrude. Now you can see it immediately jumps to the right place and not looping back to itself. And then when I do the extrude, I can add as many divisions as I need to get to that profile. Right, so I don't want to go too high, nor do I want to go too low. Something like that seems to be okay. I'm happy with the extrude. So after the fact, I can go grab the curve, and if I manipulate these points in component mode, I can change the profile and the shape of my curve. Very convenient. Good stuff. So let's say I'm happy with that. I essentially want to bake this shape to the model, and I want to break the connection between the curve and the shape, and you can do that by just clearing out the history. So delete history. There we go. And I think now we can go ahead and delete the curve. If I unisolate the scene now, you need to unisolate if you want to bring everything back. And there we go. There's our first successful extrude along the curve. Now this process can be repeated many times until you're absolutely satisfied with the profile and design of it. And so I've already made these curves now. In the next video, what I'm going to do is actually start focusing on the more specific details, how to model things. So I'm going to skip kind of a bit ahead and start working on more detail on each individual element. We've essentially blocked out the basic shape and basic volumes and all the simple simplified versions of the models, and now I just need to essentially fill it in with all the details that I want, all these blocked out versions, and then after that we can start focusing on the more specific details. So thank you for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this part, or the first part of the session, and I will definitely continue with this in the next part. Please subscribe, and please like and also share if you really loved the video. It's always a great pleasure to help you guys out as much as I can. So thanks for watching again, and I hope you guys hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.